Hi, I'm Harlan.
I'm Connor.
And we are
Trekking the Cross.
As a warning for this episode, we will be discussing very difficult and harsh topics including racism, lynching, murder, suicide, hangings, and more. Listeners' discretion is advised, and we recommend that you be 18 and older to listen to this episode. On the night of December 27th, 1878, Robert Skellie came home to see that his wife did not prepare supper, and instead had been entertaining company. In Robert Skellie's first-hand account in the book History of Pierce County, Volume 1, he states, "I came home that night, and there was scarcely any fire in the hearth, and I was tremendously cold, and I asked her something about supper, and she remarked, I had company all evening and had cooked nothing. I was sitting in the chair by the hearth, and the stew pan was sitting by the hearth, and I say, I've caught up with you at last, and pick up the pan, and struck her on the back of the head, but didn't knock her down, only a stooping position, breaking the pan into pieces. Then I picked up a heavy chair and hit her on the head with all my power, and she fell senselessly upon the floor, and I thought was dead." Robert Skellie did more than just hit her with a pan and then hit her with a chair. He also kicked her and left her for dead on the floor. 15 days later, on January 10th, she died, never regaining consciousness. Skellie, as safety measures against outrage of Blackshear and Pierce County citizens, had been taken to Chatham County Jail in Savannah. When Mrs. Skellie died, a murder warrant was issued and a trial was set for April term of the Superior Court. The jury convicted Robert Skellie as guilty, and Skellie was sentenced to be hanged. This was Pierce County's first hanging and had turned out to also be its last. A crowd of 2,000 to 3,000 people were there in a wooded area beyond Rankin Branch, now Burney Branch, in southeast Blackshear. His execution was scheduled for May 23rd, 1879. Under the subsection 25-man guard, I will be reading from the Pierce County history book. They stood in awe as Sheriff Byrd with the guard of 25 selected men drove up in his wagon. Sheriff Byrd assisted Skellie from the wagon, and a Reverend Father, I don't know how to pronounce his name, so I'll be spelling it, Schlenke, had him kneel down at the foot of the steps at the gallows in prayer. Afterwards, he was ordered as to ascend the scaffold. Sheriff Byrd was also the editor of the Blackshear News and gave an account to what followed on May 29th's issue. One of the last things Skellie states is that, "Furthermore, I will say that my heart is right and I have made peace with my God. He has forgiven me, and so do I forgive everyone on this earth and sincerely hope that you will forgive me. Now I wish you all well and bid you all adieu." At precisely 1:30, the blows were given, and Robert Skellie was swinging between heaven and earth. Dr. Andrew M. Moore and Dr. Clement T. Latimer examined him, and at 12 minutes, life was pronounced extinct. Robert Skellie did an account of what happened that evening, and I thought it was interesting that he actually tried to kill himself. He states, "I was then going to hang myself, but could not find the rope that generally hung in the back room, but had been misplaced. And then I thought of the butcher knife, and got and sat down on the chair by my wife, and was just in the act of cutting my own throat from ear to ear when the officers broke in upon me and took me a prisoner. I was born in Cork, Ireland, April 20th, 1838, and I die willingly and deservingly." This was from the Blackshear News, Thursday, May 29th, 1879. We actually do not know if Mrs. Skellie was actually cheating on Robert Skellie, but his life and her life, may they rest in peace. This all happened at the first jail located in Blackshear, Georgia. This is not the same jail that is currently up in front of City Hall. That one we will be calling the third jail. The third jail was officially finished in 1894.
If one were to visit the Blackshear City Hall in Blackshear, Georgia, directly across the street, you'll find the historic building, the Blackshear City Jail. This is actually the third jail of Blackshear.
Though we are calling this jail the third jail, technically it is the fourth jail, as there was a jail that was created after the incorporation of Blackshear in 1857. Due to a lack of evidence, we will not be discussing this first official jail, but we will be referencing the one that burned in 1880. This jail was created sometime in the 1870s.
Between midnight and 1 a.m., on the night of January 18th, 1880, the fire alarm was sounded on the city streets due to the jail catching fire. According to the prisoner, because he was cold that night, he lit a piece of paper to keep warm. Following this, he lay down and went to sleep with the paper still burning. Awoken by the alarm and by the rising temperature, he assumed the jail must have been aflame. When the crowd arrived, the entire side of the prisoner's occupied cell was on fire. In order to save the man, the cell had to be broken into. The prisoner made an escape, and assumptions were brought about that this was all part of an elaborate escape plot by the man's concoction. This is all a reference to the book History of Pierce County, Volume 3. Following the jail burning, on February 4th, 1880 and onward, any criminals in Pierce County were shipped to neighboring jail sites temporarily, such as the one in Wayne County. On September 30th, 1882, the News and Signal reports that the second city jail, known as the Blackshear City Jail, is completed. Only a month later, on October 20th, 1882, Charlie Gadsden, who has been frequently eluding the law in Blackshear and Waycross, becomes the first inmate at the Blackshear City Jail. Rumors even circulated that because of this, the jail earned the nickname the Gadsden House. In October of 1886, Pierce Superior Court recommended that all Pierce County prisoners be sent to Chatham County Jail for safekeeping in the future. It is implied that the jail is without guard at this point and therefore deemed unsafe. Now, finally, in May 15th, 1890, the first mention of our namesake jail is mentioned in the Blackshear Times, in that Pierce should have a, quote, commodious and safe brick jail provided with steel cells. In May 22nd of 1890, in regards to the new design of the jail, it should be, quote, Gothic in design to illustrate the Goths and Vandals of society who occupy it, with a dash of the Renaissance to point to the new birth unto righteousness when the jail is delivered.
The Goths and Vandals were two of the Germanic groups that clashed with the Roman Empire throughout Europe and North Africa from the 3rd to 5th century AD. Because most of the information comes from Roman sources, aka the enemies of the Goths and Vandals, most of the information that we can find is a negative perspective of them. So in the context of the jail, it makes sense that they would call criminals Goths and Vandals, though it does have a racist connotation against the Germans. But that's not to say that Connor and I agree with them being called Goths and Vandals and being racist against Germans. Now, the difference between Gothic and Renaissance is that Gothic was primarily devotional and religious, whereas Renaissance art was more world-centered. This means that at the time, they were leaving the perspective of focusing on religion and now focusing on a new world, including science and exploration. This means, in the context of the jail, they wanted to create something entirely different than what was.
In December 1893, Pierce Superior Court laid out detailed plans for the construction of the new brick jail with new steel cells, the October Term Committee being responsible for laying these plans out. Due to maintaining a constant guard presence and sending their own prisoners to out-of-town jails, this was the main reason they felt a new jail ought to be built. It is April 26, 1894. W.O. All, Ordinary of Pierce County, released a notice to contractors concerning the new jail. Sealed bids would be received at his office in Blackshear until May 15, 1894, the plans, specifications, and form of contract being found at his office, as well as the office of the architect, Mr. Geo Feltham of Waycross. On May 17, 1894, the contract to build a new jail was awarded to Poly Jail Building Manufacturing Company of St. Louis, Missouri for $4,992, and that completion of the jail will be by September 1st, 1895. The date is October 25th, 1894. At long last, the Blackshear Times unveils the first news reporting of the Blackshear Jail being completed. August 15th, 1895, Anna Campbell is confined in the old jail, now being used as a calaboose, charged for insanity.
Calaboose is another word for prison. In early 19th century America, care for mental illness was non-existent, and the afflicted were usually put in prisons, almshouses, or inadequate supervision by families. This is to say that Blackshear at the time was no different, and mental illness support was non-existent. This information was found on the University of Toledo's website.
On August 15th, 1899, a fire originating in O'Neill's store swept away the block at the corner of Main and Railroad Streets. The Old Town Jail, or calaboose, was the last building to burn, and the fire caused minimal damage to the new county jail, the one we're referencing. The heat broke some window panes. It has been 21 years since our jail has been mentioned. Finally, on April the 22nd, 1920, the Blackshear Times mentions a very sad picture of its current condition. The grand jury inspects the jail and find it in very poor condition. Improvements warrant a leaky roof, a worn and cracked cell floor which leaks through into the rooms below, a rusty metal ceiling, the cell room walls stained, dirty, and out of repair. The roof needed mending, cell room floor of cement relaid, and the wall recovered. Building is kept, quote, as clean as is possible in its present condition. On April 28, 1921, the grand jury desires a newer, modern jail and to abolish the current standing one. The recommendation was to contact the current jailer, J.W. Yarborough's family, to keep the premises as clean and tidy as possible under present conditions. On December 1st, 1921, the grand jury's opinion is that the jail is difficult to upkeep. J.W. Yarborough trying as he might to do so. Sanitary arrangements are poor, the lack of provisions for women inmates are inexcusable, and there are no mattresses, simply iron cots. November 22nd, 1923. The grand jury finds the jail to be in as good condition as possible, except for the immediate repairs of upstairs toilets, a leaky roof, and keeping the jail free of vermin. They find the jail to be too small, unsanitary, and in an inconvenient location relevant to the courthouse, and they recommend a newer jail be built within better proximity to the courthouse and with sufficient need fit for the county. A year later, April 24, 1924, Grand Jury Foreman J.S. Pittman echoes the thoughts stated in November of last year, restating that the old jail is too small and almost beyond repair. On May 15, 1924, G.M. Shepard writes poorly about the city jail, berating its current status, saying that in 1890 the building may have been acceptable, but today is in much need of replacement, also stating that the criminals have become more commonplace. He goes on to push the building of a newer jail, insisting on little or no objection among the citizens. On November 20, 1924, the grand jury calls the jail a disgrace to Pierce County, deeming it unlivable for human beings, including the sheriff's living quarters. There was only a single toilet for all inmates to use. Their viewpoint was of such that they referred to white prisoners as, quote, men and women, and they simply referred to black prisoners in a derogatory manner. And they said that they deserved two separate spaces, saying that the fact that the two share a common space was unfounded. They also said, quote, they were compelled to use the same toilet and bath. The push for a new jail continues.
This is to say that the historic Blackshear Jail was actually unsegregated, but to quote-unquote get with the times, they needed to create a new jail that was.
On April 22, 1926, the county commissioner says plans for a new jail are being prepared and that construction is expected to begin within 60 and 90 days. On November 8, 1926, the grand jury, despite the jail's inadequacy, claim it to be in good condition, and they eagerly await the construction of a new jail. And so our story ends here. The story of two jails before our current historic jail.
On September 24th, 1918, a 17-year-old black individual named Sandy Reeves / Sandy Ray was removed from Blackshear Jail after being wrongfully accused of criminally assaulting a 3-year-old girl. Through newspaper articles, online articles, books, and more, we were able to contact the Library of Congress to get more information. And through the information from the Library of Congress, we were able to find direct documents from the NAACP of Waycross, Georgia, to get his full story. There will be an episode directly dedicated to Sandy Reeves through our investigative journalism into his life and his story. So be sure to check that out. It'll be released the same day as this one. You can also find these documents directly on our Facebook page called Tracking the Cross, or TrackingTheX. I will be reading the direct letter from the NAACP about his story, word for word. The only thing I will be leaving out is some descriptions of the white individuals. However, you can read that on your own through our Facebook page. In September, the little town of Blackshear, Georgia, which has a population of 1,200 souls, located a few miles distant of the rather progressive town of Waycross, Georgia, a mob vented its spleen on its undersized colored boy of 17. Although the mob knew at the time that it lynched the boy, that its victim was not guilty. The facts in this case are these. Sandy Ray, a diminutive black boy in short trousers, 17 of age, was working on September 24th with his father on the farm of a white man named McDonald, who owned a small farm on the outskirts of Blackshear. Sandy's father worked on McDonald's farm on shares, and on that day mentioned above, was working in the field. Sandy was working on the field with his father and was carrying loads of fodder from the field to the barn situated near the house in which McDonald's family lived. McDonald on this day was away on business, and his wife was gone into town to make some purchases, leaving the two children in the care of Sandy Ray's sister, whom worked for the McDonald family as a maid of all work. When Sandy completed his task of carrying fodder, he returned to the field to work with his father. On reaching the field, he discovered that he had left his coat near the house and secured permission from his father to return for it. While there, he went to the grape arbor situated near the house to gather some grapes, and he was followed by the 3-year-old girl. Sandy, who was at the top of the arbor, gathering grapes while the child was under the arbor playing. While doing this, a 5-cent piece fell from Sandy's pocket, landing on the ground in front of the child, who picked it up. Sandy immediately jumped down from the arbor and asked the child for his money. The child refused to give him the money, and an argument ensued. Finally, Sandy snatched the money from the hand of the child and walked off, returning to the field where his father was working, and resumed his tasks there. The child, however, threw itself down on the ground in a fit of passionate rage, screaming and making a great commotion in its vexed fit of ill temper. Shortly after, the mother returned from town and was greatly alarmed at finding the child in this condition. Learning that Sandy had been near the house, she insistently became greatly frightened at the inherent cries of the child. A physician of Blackshear, Dr. Henry, was called in, who carefully examined the child, with particular pains expended to see whether or not any attempt to assault the child had been made. After the examination, he told the mother that the child's body bore no bruises or any marks of rough handling, that the only harm to it was the snatching of the money from its hand. This happened between noon and 1 o'clock. Between 3 and 4 o'clock of the same afternoon, the doctor returned to the house with the sheriff, who went to the field where the boy was working with his father, and arrested him. This had been for safekeeping, as the news had spread about Sandy about raping the McDonald's child. This statement, at any rate, was made to the father of the boy when he protested against the arrest of his son. Sandy was taken to Waycross and placed in the jail there. Later in the afternoon, an investigation of the affair was made in Blackshear, and Sandy was brought back to the place to be present at the hearing. This caused a commotion in Waycross, and a crowd of men from this town went to Blackshear and formed part of a crowd which rapidly formed there. It seemed that though the crowd there was a very strong doubt as to the actual guilt of Sandy of any crime, but strong indignation that he should even snatch his own property from the hand of a white child. Meanwhile, after the investigation, the boy had been placed in the flimsy jail at Blackshear, no doubt terrified at the attitude of the crowd in their muttering antagonism. Soon after this happened, the crowd of men went to the jail and secured the boy, little or no opposition being offered by the jailers to the mob. Sandy was taken back to Waycross, and the mob being led by a white man of Waycross, Ralph Brimson by name. Brimson was recognized by Lee Tover, hackman of Waycross. The crowd took the boy, who was in a state of abject terror, and carried him to a spot near the Atlantic Coast Railroad shops in the western part of town, a section known as Old Nine District. Here, the boy was strung up to a tree and his body was riddled with bullets. Although members of the mob openly bragged afterwards of their participation in the lynching, the coroner's verdict was the usual and expected one of the deceased came to his death at the hands of parties unknown to the jury. I will be reading another account. This is dated October 28th, 1918, about a month later. This is also from the NAACP documents, received and archived by the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. The home of the parties was in Blackshear, Georgia. The white man lives on the eastern portion of the town in front of the white cemetery. The boy had been a trusty, handy servant, around the home for nearly a year. The day when the deed was supposed to have been committed, the boy had been working on the white man's field with his father a portion of that morning. Later, he did some hauling as a helper and lost his coat. So after going back to the field, he missed his coat and asked his father to allow him to go hunt for it. This had been done between 1 and 12 o'clock. This was also the hour that the deed was said to be done. The boy went to the house to see his sister, who had been asked to stay with the children while the mother had gone to town. One story goes that the boy and the child were out at the grape tree, and the boy dropped a coin which the child picked up and would not give back, so the boy took it. The child fell to the ground and hollowed. Another story goes that the children were asleep while the boy was at the house. The child was only 3 years old. The father of the child had an examination showing that the child was not soiled. I will be leaving the name of the farmer and his wife out of this podcast episode, but you can read it on Facebook. The farmer and his wife expressed no concern about the child as she was not hurt. The boy, however, went back to the field to his father, and between 3 and 4 o'clock, Dr. Henry and Herbert Riggins went to the field to arrest the boy. The father wanted a statement from the boy, and because of his desire, he was cursed and threatened if he opened his mouth. The child, whose last name was Ray instead of Reeves, was taken to Waycross Jail. The Blackshear crowd came and took him from the Waycross Jail and carried him back to Blackshear, but did him no harm, placing him in the jail there. By this time, the mob spirit was well worked in Waycross, so a mob from the latter place goes to Blackshear, and being joined there by others, proceeds to the jail to get the boy and carried him to Waycross near the RR, which is the railroad shops, and lynched him. I will also be leaving the family's addresses out of this, but can still be seen on Facebook. This is a direct newspaper quote. Waycross, Georgia, September 24th. Farmers coming to Waycross this morning on Waycross Glenmore Road discovered the body of Sandy Ray, a 17-year-old black, hanging from a tree near the Atlantic coastline, riddled with bullets. The black was accused of criminal assault on a 3-year-old white child of a prominent family of Blackshear yesterday afternoon. As soon as caught, he was rushed here for safekeeping in the Ware County Jail. Just as the first party reached the entrance of the jail, a second automobile containing Blackshear people rushed up, and the prisoner was taken from the first party and had been carried back to Blackshear and put in the jail there. Approximately 1 o'clock in the morning, 100 men stormed the jail and took the prisoner, but his fate was not learned until the body was discovered today. The verdict of the coroner's jury was that the victim had been taken to his death at the hands of unknown parties, and the body was ordered to be cut down and prepared for burial. Now, his story is not only relevant due to the fact that geographically he is from here, but because he was taken from the Blackshear Jail, the Historic Blackshear Jail, that we are talking about in this episode. Sandy Ray, or Sandy Reeves, is not the only black individual that was taken from the Blackshear Jail, but he is significant as he was not guilty. Sandy Ray / Sandy Reeves should be remembered more than his lynching. He was a teenage boy with feelings and dreams and goals in life. His fate should have been determined by the justice system and not a crowd / angry mob. If it wasn't for a newspaper report in The Griffin, we wouldn't have found his story. We are also thankful for a lady named Abigail. She wrote an article on Graham Parsons, and Sandy Reeves' story was also in there. Tracking footnotes, authors, and more, we were able to contact the Library of Congress to get his direct documents. You can actually hear more about our investigation of Sandy Reeves in the episode dedicated directly to him. It is posted at the same time as this one. Though the episode has ended on a somber note, we are so thankful that you listened to it and learned more about Robert Skellie, the Historic Blackshear Jails, plural, and Sandy Reeves. We will be doing more episodes on local Waycross and Blackshear, so be sure to tune in to our Patreon, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. Our YouTube will also have a behind-the-scenes tour of the Historic Blackshear Jail. All of our usernames are trackingthex/trackingthecross, spelled TrackingTheX. We would like to do a special thank you to the Pierce County Library and the Waycross-Ware County Library for allowing us to have these resources, as well as Main Street Blackshear for allowing us to get a tour of the facility, and all of the people, including the Library of Congress, who allowed us to get this information. None of this episode would be possible without the assistance of those in these libraries and Main Street Blackshear. Thank you so much again for listening to this episode. We will catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.